As always, if you want to connect with us, our meeting notes or our meetings are all hosted on Meetup. We have a Slack. All the recordings are posted on our YouTube. So if you want to follow along, send it to a coworker who couldn't make it, or revisit topics, feel free to check out there. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out to any one of us, and we can hopefully find the answer for you or find somebody who knows the answer for anything Azure related. Today, we're going to be getting a talk on Azure App Logging in production. And then on the 16th, we're going to have a Microsoft Ignite recap and also a roundtable. So come with discussions, and we're just going to kick it off there. And as always, there's some free materials out there. There's a new Ignite challenge, which I believe is a free Azure certification if you follow the MS Learn course. So we're checking out, save you about $100 and a free training session. So you can find that on Microsoft Learn. Otherwise, I'm going to pass it over to you, Brandon.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and jump directly into here. You should see my screen. So everything we're going to talk about is going to be referenced from this repo. This is available publicly. So if you want to go ahead and, if you just say, hey, I don't really care about what you're saying, Brandon, I just want to go ahead and play around with it, pull down the code, mess around, see how everything's set up. You can, everything will show as well. So I use something called Pulumi, which is basically infrastructure as code. It's built basically as like a DSL for Azure using the REST API. You can pull this down, start playing with it. Everything that'll be in there is set up in here. So literally one for one, everything will be out in Azure from there. So I'm going to go ahead, wish there was a way to easily reshare, but I'm just going to jump back over to where is, I'm not seeing a good way to jump between desktops real quick. All right. All right. Sorry, I'm just going to bring, so you should now see my screen here, which should have Writer open. So a couple things that we'll just kind of start more at like a code level, and then we'll sort of work our way up here, up to the Azure portal and talk through how everything's configured there. So a few things to kind of look at within the application itself. So one area that you can do, so if you're using like, let's say .NET Core, they actually come with a really nice feature called Application Insights Telemetry. This is a NuGet package that you can pull down. So you can actually pull this in from one of their diagnostics libraries, directly pull that in, wire it up. It's just basically some middleware. And then what this will do is basically things like within your application, all the telemetry information about like CPU and memory and trace events and all that type of stuff will end up flowing over to your application insights. You can specify when you configure this like an instrumentation key, which you'll get from application insights. If you don't, it'll look for the application insights instrumentation key as an environment variable that's set up on your app service, or if you're using like container instances or something like that, pull from there. The other one that we're also going to mention in here is for structured logging in this application, I'm using Serolog, very similar if you've used like nlog or any of those other libraries. But the nice thing is you can output your logs as a JSON format, and that works really well if, let's say, you're using like Datadog or Splunk, or you're using like log analytics and things like that, that can parse JSON really well and then kind of give you a nice structured log there. So these are two things that we can wire up. These are just a couple NuGet packages you can install, register as middleware within your application just to get kind of out of the box, just normal like telemetry and some basic trace logging there. So we'll jump over into this one. So inside my application, I've got an extension method I've built. And this is really, so mind you, 100% I want to show you is stuff that I'm currently using at my full-time employment. So this is going to be very similar, but really what we're trying to do in here is actually register Serolog with our application. So I've got my host builder from .NET. I'm going to use Serolog from there. And then what I'm doing is I'm saying read from my configuration file. So I do have some Serolog log settings that I'm pulling in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to configure all my services to be able to read from that. I'm going to set up some log context that gets things. So I'm going to basically say, like, if I throw an exception, I want to log all the details of it. I also want to be able to capture correlation header. So I'm basically using just the default out of the box correlation header ID. I'm also going to have a custom enricher in here, which I'll talk about in a second. And then what I want to do is say, every time I log anything, I want to write it to application insights. So this is kind of hooking up our out of the box logging. So when I'd say like logger.log warning, logger.log information, what it's going to do is it's going to write all those logs over to application insights, and it's going to pump all those out, and I'm going to set that up as a custom event is what this events thing is here. And there's a couple other options in here as well. Like I can set it up as a trace or an event. And then what I'm going to do on here as well is I'm going to pump it out to console. So that way I also can see it if let's say I'm using like Docker logs and I want to go look at the logs of my application, my running app, I can go take a look at that there as well. And then in here, this register logging is basically just hooking up my context enricher and then a telemetry enricher. What that is doing under my logging is that context enricher is log analytics as well as app insights, supports the concept of custom dimensions. So what you can do is you can add additional information on all your log events. So for instance, on this one, I'm setting up a correlation header, but I can do things like this where I can say, you know, HTTP context accessor, HTTP context request user, I think it's .user, right? And then I can do things like pull claims out, right? So I can say, get me my user ID or things like that. So I can add things like user ID onto my logs. I can add things like maybe I'm using it with a custom header or something like that. I can go add all of that type of stuff into my logs. And then you can use an enricher that'll automatically, every time you call log, it'll check to see, do I have an HTTP context or do I have some sort of other, you know, app level context, pull information out and add that onto each one of my logs. The other things we have in here is also the telemetry. So you can do things like that. So if you're doing telemetry as well and you want to have like look at all your system level metrics and all that type of stuff, you can add very similar events and other kinds of dimensions directly onto that as well. And then some of the log, and then basically kind of seeing that in action would be is, let's say I'm using one of my applications in here and I create a book. Then on this one, essentially when I say like logger.log warning, logger.log information, I'm just using the out of the box logging framework directly built into Microsoft's .NET Core. I'm not doing anything special. And then all that stuff that I configured with Seralog, all that stuff I configured with the custom enrichers and everything will automatically get picked up and added onto every single log event that comes out of my system. Any questions on that? All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing and go over to the Azure portal real quick and jump back over and share that. All right, now you should see this again. All right, so inside the Azure portal over here is all my resources I've got set up. So again, I mentioned everything that we've got in there is configured through Pulumi. So we'll just kind of walk through everything that we have in here. So we'll just kind of take a look real quick at one of our applications. So when you're working within your application out in Azure, you have a few things at your disposal. So one option you have is you can jump directly into something like Deployment Center, and then Deployment Center has some logs in here. So for instance, on my settings in here is I'm deploying directly from a new Docker container that I'm deploying. And then with that Docker container, I can come in here and I can actually look at all the logs that come off of my Docker container. So I can actually see requests flowing in. I can come in here and view things like, you know, is it pulling an image? Is it running an image? And check for kind of some of that startup in here. So that's one option you have if you're trying to do more of real-time logs. You can also come into the log stream as well. And then with the log stream is I can come in here and get real-time logs against it. So it's going to be a very similar view as what we showed before. So if I was to come over and let's say kick off, you know, some events in here and say, you know, I'm going to kick off a couple API calls, right? You'll be able to see, assuming I'm connected, you'll start seeing some of those requests flowing in real time and actually be able to see all that information get logged. So those are kind of two options you have as far as like getting more real-time logs from your system. Some other things that you have at your disposal as well is diagnostic settings. So one thing that you can register with literally every single resource. So it doesn't matter if you're dealing with an app service, or if you're dealing with, let's say, a SQL database or Key Vault or anything like that, is you have app services. So this is basically what's available coming off of your app service that you have that you can set up to automatically export to basically a log analytics workspace. So when I come in here and edit this, I can set it up where basically saying like all my console logs, HP logs, app service logs, etc., as well as all metrics around like CPU utilization, database utilization, etc. I can pump all of this information out to a log analytics workspace and then consume it here. You can also do things off of that, such as push it to a storage account. So if you're using, let's say, blob storage, you can push it there. You can stream it to Event Hub. So if you need to do custom things, or you want to pipe it external to Azure, so you could use something like this, like send it over to Datadog or something like that. You can export all your data that way as well. Some other nice things with this as well is now that some of this stuff is exporting, really there's a lot of, one thing to note with this that's kind of a negative is that with, for instance, the log stream and as well as the deployment stuff, is you basically need, in order to get access in here to be able to view these logs, you're going to have to basically be at a contributor level as far as a role over your app service. And if you're dealing with like highly compliant environment like PCI or SOC 2 or Nacho or HIPAA or something like that, you may not have direct access to these logs because some of the stuff is like, not be able to go in and edit system settings. So there might be things that preclude you from being able to use these that you would maybe not want to be dependent upon this for production level debugging. So with that, nice thing is that Microsoft gives you, on Azure, they have App Insights. And App Insights, I believe, is a pretty low cost solution. So when you actually provision App Insights, what ends up happening, and this should pull back, is it's going to set up an instrumentation key for you. And then this instrumentation key is pulled directly from App Insights and is set up in here. So one thing to kind of help connect your systems together through this is that when I provision this application on here, and I'll show this real quick, is when you provision your application with Application Insights, is you want to go ahead and set it up as to be flow type red field. Out of the box, the default is blue field, which basically means like it's all sort of self-contained within that App Insights instance. But red field allows you then to be able to send this over to a workspace resource ID, which is your log analytics workspace. And those two things combined, what's nice about that is it's going to send it over to this log analytics workspace. So let's say you're using like a microservice architecture within your cloud environment. You've got like 10 different APIs, and you may want to be able to centralize all your logs across your APIs into a single logging solution. By setting this up, now all of your App Insights logs, telemetry, metrics, etc., will all flow directly into this log analytics workspace. So everything we'll see in here will be available over here as well. And then you can add aggregations across your entire system, like custom dashboards, custom alerts, things like that. So the nice thing with this approach is in here, there's a few things that are at our disposal. So one is failures in here. So using this to be able to drill in. So I've actually got an endpoint that I've set up that just does a basic exception. So it's library app, and I can just come in here and say exceptions, and I can just throw an exception, right, and just trigger that a whole bunch. And then the nice thing with that is then it'll show up under here, and it'll just sit there and tick, and all of a sudden here within a minute or so, you'll see a spike as it comes up and generates exceptions. But you also get the opportunity to dig in and see exactly like what method under what endpoint through, right? So inside here, that exceptions throw, I've actually inside my main API, I've got just a little dummy controller I created. Whoops, let's go in here. I've got a little dummy exceptions controller I created, exceptions and then throw, which should align up nicely with this. So I can actually come in here and actually see, I threw an exception directly from that endpoint and be able to see exactly what the status code was from it, be able to pull back things like correlation IDs, things like that to be able to go diagnose the problem. The other thing that we use pretty heavily is the transaction search as well. So if I were to come in here, let's take a look within the last, 4 hours or so, I'll filter it down to requests on here. this should show up here in a second. So one nice thing with this is that, for instance, if I'm making a call on this one, I'm going to create, is what I really like about this on the request is it'll show you basically a breakdown of all the, like basically in this one, I'm making a call post HTTP method to authors create. So I'd be the authors controller, the create method. And then under the hood, it's making a call to my database, and I can see the timing on that and see exactly how long every single request made. And you're not restricted to only services directly on Azure. So we use Auth0 for our identity provider. And the nice thing is we can actually see calls being made from our applications going out to Auth0, coming back in. We can see calls being made from our applications to like API management. We can see traction that leaves our system going to like Datadog, and we can see all that information flowing not only between our app services, but also external to our system. And we can see exactly how long it takes to make the request out and then come back in. The other thing that's also nice at the disposal as well is you can have an application map in here. So if you notice on here, we can see some stuff where we're seeing because of me triggering those exceptions, I can see about 13% of all my requests are failing with errors. I can see also all my dependencies. So if you had dependencies in here that are external to, Azure, those would also show up as well. So let's say I were to make a call to Auth0, I would see that traffic. I'd see another box over here of me making a call off Auth0 and being redirected out and then back in. And I can see exactly how many calls I'm making and what the timing on all those are. So one other thing that we use pretty heavily as well is we also take advantage of alerts. So on this one, I've actually got one active alert that I've triggered recently. So this is something that we can programmatically set up. So inside this application, if I come back over here, we'll take a look at how we've got that configured under modules. And I believe my alerts are actually set up under here. Is I've created a really simple alert. So I've got an action group in here. And what this is doing is basically I'm just saying, hey, anytime an alert happens of any type, you can create a whole bunch of different action groups. And then off those action groups on this one, for instance, I have it set up to go ahead and send the administrator an email. And you can do things off the action group, such as call a webhook. You can do things like send a text message. You can do a whole bunch of things from there. So we'll show that real quick. So under here, I've got this action group that gets triggered. This is exactly what we were showing. And on this one, what I've got is I'm actually has it set up right here to go ahead and send an email. You can have it set up in here to do actions like call a webhook, call a secure webhook, trigger a function app or a logic app and a function and things like that. So a good use case on this could be things like what I want you to do is every time I get so many errors over a period of time, like let's say, over the span of, let's say 5 minutes, if I've got more than two 500 responses, I want you to go ahead and call a PagerDuty webhook and then have PagerDuty trigger the on-call team member. And then you can also pull tags directly from your resources in here to say, based upon, let's say, a team for this resource, send a tag over so that way PagerDuty can kick in and say, we're going to alert the platform team, or we're going to alert the e-commerce team or something like that. So you have quite a few options in here. So on this one, it's just a simple email, and then it's going to send me an email on this. And the rule is set up on here where basically I'm going to query my requests where the result count is greater than 500. So I can actually pull this query. I can go back to App Insights, and under my logs, I can run the same query here and pull that back, and I can see all the alerts. So every time I get more than a certain period of time, then I can trigger that alert as well. And if you were to do like email or text message or PagerDuty or something like that, ultimately what you're going to get is something similar to this. And so in here, I've got that alert that I've set up in here, that library app 500. I can come back over here, see my alerts of that library app 500, wherever it's at. Right here, it's going to pull that information back, and I can see the exact query that was used to generate that. And then I can see a breakdown from Insights, all the dimensions on here that I basically what caused it to trigger. So I can pull and see the app ID. I can see, where it was triggered from. I can see application name. I can see kind of a breakdown of what ultimately caused that, the endpoint that was thrown, etc., and be able to go dig in deeper from that. So one nice thing too is that because all of our app insights flows into the library logs, all these logs in here are also available through our log analytics workspace as well over here. So I can jump over into log analytics. And in here, it's the exact same logs that we have in here. So some nice things with log analytics is because all of our telemetry, all of our logs, everything's flowing in, is I can come in here and I can create things like I want to pull back app metrics. And I want to say pull back, let's say for the last 30 minutes, and I can run and I can pull back information around usage through my system. So all of this information, for instance, is available, basically pulling in from my actual app service, my database, etc. I can pull back like Azure, I believe it's Azure metrics is another one. Pulling back this information. It's going to pull back quite a bit because this is pulling all that diagnostic settings that are getting centralized and aggregated, which will take a little bit to run. There we go. And so on here, I can see things like, because I called my database, my DTU used, I can see that I counted 1, and you can use things like to aggregate this. So you can actually pull back and say, let's go ahead and aggregate over, you could bin this. You could say, I want to know the total number of like database transactional units used, broken down per hour, across each service, and I can actually see that. Or I want to know a breakdown of like 200 versus 403 versus 401 versus 500, etc. I want to see HP status codes and be able to pull that information back as well. We had shown back over here with our app service going into our console logs. So when we originally looked at the log stream over here and we're able to see all this information, I had mentioned all this data was getting piped over to log analytics as well. So if you don't have access, let's say because you don't have contributor access to get hit that page, you can come back over here as well, and I can call in here and say, what is it? App service console logs. All those same logs are available here as well. And so I can get all that information coming out of here to see exactly what's happening in my system. And I can dig into all of that. Then some other nice things with this too is you could create we can create custom queries off of this. So I can do things where I believe I can do something like app requests. Let's just grab one real quick. So we'll do an app request, and then we'll do where result code equals 200, for instance. Hopefully this works. Might not like the. All right, just a sec. I believe it should be under the double equals. Yeah, there we go. So I can create, let's say, a query from this. And the nice thing too is I can save this as a function in here. So I could come in here and be like 200 results, right? And then I can also say, I don't know, it doesn't really matter what this is, legacy category query or something. And I can parameterize that query. So I can come in here and say, I want to pass in, let's say, an int. I can do status code, right? Default value of 200. And then I can create a query that I can pass in things. And then I can call that function as well. So I can do things like success. I can't remember what it was called, the functions that I had. So if I did whatever that function was I created, I could call those functions and aggregate them as two. Here we go, workspace functions. I can do something like success results on here, and I can get the same results from above, and pass that in and then generate queries. So you could like reuse your queries across different things. So if you wanted to build out and centralize everything into log analytics, you can build functions around requests and then parameterize them and then build that out to be able to be reused across a bunch of different dashboards. So I know Splunk has this functionality, but you can get this functionality directly out of the box with log analytics as well. And one nice thing with all of this is that ultimately can roll up into dashboards. So everything I've shown up till now, you can use things like build out dashboards. So if I were to come back into, let's say, a resource, we can go look at, let's take a look at our library database over here. Or actually, let's go look at our apps. I can come over here on any of our stuff that we have in here, is I can come in here and say, oh, I want to capture data out, right? And I want to log it to my dashboard over here. And I can pin that, and then it'll get added to that dashboard. But I can also come in here and do things like this, where I can say, okay, what I want to do is get my app service console logs where time generated greater than, I can't remember what the, a go, I believe it's a go, and then it's like 30M. So I ultimately want to know where console logs were created within the last 30 minutes. And then I can take that query and I can pin it to my dashboard as well and send that over there. And then when you're building dashboards over here, now all of a sudden all that information shows up here. So I can not only pin like things directly from my app insights here, I can also pin things directly from my resources here, but I can also use all that log analytics workspace and generate queries, and then I can set that up as well out here and pin. So one use case that we have on this is using it for, let's say, blocked WAF requests. So for instance, like we want to know, not only do we want to be alerted every time that our WAF starts blocking a bunch of requests, we also want to have a quick way to come in here, and without having all the team members go in and have to re-query that data, we want to provide a single pane of glass so they can just come in here and see the request and dig into the WAF and be like, oh, you know, a cookie, you know, like Google Analytics pushed a new cookie name and all of a sudden it's getting blocked, or customers trying to hit us from, you know, some country that we haven't seen before and it's throwing like a bot prevention type option or something like that. Be able to do that. And the nice thing too with all of that as well is you can do, so I can come in here, and that query that I have is you can also do things like summarizing. So on this one, I'm just running metrics across my thing, and I can render this as like a pie chart. I can also change this to be, I think it's like a time chart, be able to view a bunch of different things. I can also do things, I think it's like bar chart and a bunch of different options in here. So I could sit there and say, adjust this, and then I can apply this and update my graph. So I could say, oh, I actually want to view it like this. I can save that and update it here. And then I come back here and be like, no, I actually like the pie chart more. So I'm going to put it back and then run that, make sure it's exactly what I want, and then do save and put it back to what it was. But the nice thing with all of this is like having that ability to trace going from my application, right? Pulling all this information back from, you know, the purpose is like being able to pull all this information back directly from how I capture the logs within my system and the telemetry, tracing all that to app insights, capturing all the diagnostic settings as well, pulling all that information into app insights, and then ultimately flowing it over to my log analytics workspace enables me to now be able across all my different applications to have one spot I go if I need to debug anything in my system across the board. Any questions on any of that?
Hey, Brandon, I did throw a question in the chat. Do you see any latency with alerts? So like I know App Insights I've seen sometimes take 5 to 10 minutes to show like a 500. Are your alerts quicker, or is it about the same turnaround? Or are you seeing that at all?
Really kind of depends. So on this alert that we have over here, I've actually got the rule set up to trigger, I'm trying to remember where we did that at. There's actually a rule whenever the search is greater than 5 over 30 minutes. So we actually have on this one, I have a threshold set up to actually say like, if I get more than 5 alerts in a 30-minute window, then go ahead and trigger. And then also, I only ever want you to run that query once every 5 minutes. So I don't want to like ping constantly. So it really kind of depends on how you've set up your alerts coming out of here, on what the polling frequency is, and then what that kind of window you're looking at is as well. One thing to note that we've personally ran into is we've noticed it's a lot faster going from the least amount of latency is actually going directly to your resource and looking at the resource properties, right? So like if I were to come into in here, right, and look directly at the log stream, I get more real time, right? I see those events come in basically as they happen. But what we also see is typically there's a delay, a slight delay before it gets into here. So you're not going to have like real time. It's going to take time for it to flow over into here. Usually that's about a couple minutes that I've personally seen. The other thing to keep in mind as well, especially when we looked at like the transaction search up here, is it takes time also for the request to build up. So for instance, if I was to run this, right, and I'll just go trigger a bunch of like create events in here. By the way, I have Postman open to do that. So I just triggered a whole bunch of requests, and notice they're not here yet. So it'll take a couple minutes for them to finally start showing up, which may not be good enough for real-time debugging, especially if you're dealing with like a critical production issue. So you might want to go back to the source and directly look at the request there versus coming in being dependent upon this all the time. But the other thing I've noticed is not only does it take time to get to here, but it takes even longer to get over to the log analytics workspace. And I'm not sure what's happening behind the scenes that actually like causes it to like aggregate and dump all that over there. But we've seen it take up to 45 minutes for it to arrive at your log analytics workspace before. Usually it's within about 5 minutes or so, but we've seen it take up to 45 minutes plus. And so this is more of like, I'm trying to pull reports and more historical audit stuff. We usually build a lot of our more real-time alerts off our app insights instead of here. And then when we absolutely need to debug something in production more real-time, we'll just jump directly into the log stream on the app service.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So in here, I see that request that came in, and I'm going to see, I did build this out. Usually when you have much more dependencies here, it takes longer for this whole dependency tree to build out, especially when you have a lot of dependencies here. So any other questions? I can't see the chat at all.
I know you're focused on logging. Is there any story around metrics? Are you able to add metrics to your code?
Are you talking, what kind of metrics are you talking, like trace events and things like that?
No, I'm talking like, let's say your customers want to know how many dollars in sales they got per day or per whatever unit measure they're interested in. Is there a way to do application level metrics as opposed to like CPU utilization or memory pressure, like application level metrics?
We aren't currently doing anything with that yet. I know there's a whole bunch of things that you can capture specifically around like service metrics, and you can do some stuff around that as well. A good example of, I know within here, one area that we use some of the metrics on is specifically like auto scale, and that's probably not like customer level stuff. I didn't show this one, but you can set up like auto scale based upon like metrics around like specifically like CPU and other things. And then you can adjust this on a whole bunch of different things as well. I know within the application as well, especially when you get into, I believe, some of the metrics down here, there's all that information flows off of here. You can create things like data in, data out type usage and a bunch of other things as well off of here. So you could say like, I want to know I don't know, data in, aggregates and things, see some of this information as well. And then you can pin these to your dashboards as well. Not sure if that answers anything, but otherwise, one thing that we do in our app is we use some of the custom dimensions. So coming back over here, we trigger specific actions. So I'll show this real quick. So under where's my logging at? Under my context in here, when I enrich my queries, we actually use like customer specific logs where we want them to be able to go view their own logs on the system. We tag some of their logs with custom dimensions here, and then we export all those logs from log analytics so that way customers can kind of view their own logs, and we just filter the logs based upon their tenant, and then we aggregate it for different use cases. So if they want to see how many times have I called the API to be able to say, like, maybe you have a per API charge on your system, you could then log it, tag it with their customer identifier through here, and then you could then add a query on the other side that says go query log analytics filtered by that customer ID, and then be able to aggregate that and say, well, based upon, you know, a penny per API call times 3,000 API calls, you're going to get charged, you know, what is that, like $30 or 300 or whatever it is, right? You can just like aggregate it that way if you wanted to. So
Cool, thanks.
but usually I try and use custom dimensions on my logs to kind of tag the data. That way I can go back and query it different ways later on. So. Any other questions? All right. I don't have much more than that. If anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them or stay on if people want to discuss more. A lot of everything I showed, like I mentioned, is on this repo out here. So all the infrastructure, how everything's set up, all the diagnostics are out here as well. Everything I showed around auto scaling's out here, specifically how to configure it. Using things like log analytics, right? Be able to configure all of that. Everything is set up out there as well. You know, feel free to pull all this down, play around with it, customize it, deploy it in your own environment if you want, and then set it up however you need to. So. Cool.
Any other questions? If not, again, I'll stop the recording. If you want to have something off recording or hang around, chat with Brandon, just let us know. So let me stop the recording.